Good evening, Super Horror family and esteemed guest. It's me, Eddie, your guide through the shadowy corridors of the unknown. Back again with another eerie tale for tonight's episode of Whispers in the Dark. Memorial Day is traditionally a day of remembrance, barbecues, and the joy of community. It marks the beginning of summer, a time for sunshine, laughter, and shared stories. But in the small town of Mount Birch, Maine, this particular Memorial Day will forever be remembered for a very different reason. Tonight's story follows Dan, a college student who accidentally turns the annual barbecue into, well, you'll see. So grab your favorite blanket and brace yourselves as I bring to you the Memorial Day barbecue that turned into a nightmare. Let's begin. Dan Summers was a typical college student enjoying the start of summer break. After wrapping up his first year at the bustling MIT, he found his quiet surrounding of his hometown, Mount Birch, Maine, a little too quiet for his taste. Mount Birch was a small town tucked between rolling green hills and calm waters of Lake Champlain. It was a quaint, charming, and incredibly serene town. Too serene for Dan, who was now used to the vibrant energy of city life and college chaos. Dan's family home was perched on the outskirts of the town, next to the dense birchwood forest. The forest, a thick blanket of trees stretching as far as the eye could see, was Dan's go-to place whenever he sought adventure growing up. To shake off his boredom, Dan decided to go hunting. This decision, though exciting for him, was far from legal or safe, as it was out of hunting season. In the comfortable living room of the Summers home, a tense conversation unfolded. Dan's plan to go hunting hadn't been received well. His mother, Carol, paused her dinner preparations to voice her concerns. "Dan?" she said, her voice tight with worry. "This is dangerous." Across the room, Dan's father, Thomas, a retired game warden, nodded in agreement. He sat in his favorite armchair, his strong posture hinting at his past career. "It's not just dangerous, son," he added. "It's against the law. What if you accidentally shoot someone?" "Shoot someone?" Dan exclaimed. "Dad, no one's ever in those woods. I might not even see anything worth shooting. But if I did, our Memorial Day barbecue would be all the better for it." But Dan's father would not back down. Eventually, Dan agreed to not go hunting, but instead spend the day hiking. The next day, Dan packed all the usual things he would need for a hike, along with his rifle. Ignoring his parents' concerns, Dan stepped into the dense forest. His senses were immediately enveloped by the fresh scent of pine and damp earth, the rustle of leaves under his feet breaking the forest's serene silence. About a mile in, there was a change in atmosphere. An ominous presence seemed to fill the space around him. The cheerful chirping of birds was replaced by an eerie quiet. Suddenly, he found himself face to face with a creature unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was an enormous, monstrous, a grotesque perversion of nature that sent a wave of terror coursing through him. His immediate reaction was to run, but the creature was fast, faster than anything that size should be. As he stumbled and tried to increase his pace, the realization dawned on him. He wasn't going to outrun this beast. In a split-second decision, driven by fear and adrenaline, Dan turned to face the creature. It was kill or be killed. With a swift, desperate move, he managed to aim his weapon and bring down the monstrosity. Heart pounding, he reached into his pocket for his phone, his hands shaking with the after effects of the adrenaline rush. He began to retrace the path he ran with his eyes, and there it was, lying on the ground, a few yards from where he stood. He ran over to retrieve it and cursed under his breath as he noticed the damaged camera lens, a casualty of his frantic run. He quickly snapped a photo of the fallen creature, but the result was just a blurry image of what looked like a mound of fur. It could easily be mistaken for a bear, or an even smaller creature that was really furry. Dan realized no one would believe his story with such poor evidence. With the new determination, he decided to carve a large piece of the meat from the beast. It was the least he could do to prove his incredible encounter. Grasping his hunting knife with shaky hands, he did what he had to do, then left the eerie quiet of the forest behind, carrying with him a piece of the unimaginable monster. When he got home, he was still shaken up. He put the meat in the freezer, washed up, and went straight to bed. The next few days, Dan felt uneasy, but he couldn't place why. Sure, he lied to his parents, but if he didn't bring his gun with him, he'd be dead. Still, the uneasy feeling continued growing. Then, on Sunday night, in a dream, he saw the monster in the woods, laying there, dead. Only, it started moving. Dan watched in horror as the monster picked itself off the ground and took a few wobbly steps. He watched as the monster slowly lowered itself to the ground. In a fraction of a second, it charged forward, effortlessly taking down and ragdolling a bear. It was just a dream, but the bear looked so small compared to the beast. As the beast tore up and ate the bear, Dan noticed the chunk of flesh he took from the beast was healing. The next morning it was Memorial Day. The annual Memorial Day BBQ was a much-awaited event in Mount Birch. Locals gathered at the town park, a charming green space beside Lake Champlain, bringing with them dishes to share, good spirits, and a shared love for community. This year, the day was warm, the sky was clear, and the mood was high. As Dan prepared to go, he carried with him a sense of excitement and apprehension. What happened in the forest would normally get him in trouble, but if he was armed while hiking, there really shouldn't be a problem. Some locals refused to go into the woods unarmed, in case something were to happen, like what happened to Dan. Overall, Dan's monster story had a pretty good chance of adding some excitement to the day. Dan pulled the large portion of flesh from the freezer and headed to the town park. The whole town was there. Neighbors Dan completely forgot about while in college. Old friends he hadn't seen since middle school. It was excellent. About an hour into the day, people began to get hungry, creating a lull in the conversations. This was his chance. Dan finally mustered up the courage to share his story. Standing among the gathered townsfolk, he recounted his encounter in the forest with the monstrous creature and showed the blurry photo he'd taken. The response wasn't what he'd hoped for. Laughter echoed around the park. Some slapped their knees, others wiped tears from their eyes, thoroughly amused by his story. No one believed him. They claimed the picture was just a bear, maybe a large one, but certainly not the monster he was describing. Dan considered what they were saying for a moment. Was it just a large bear? Maybe it was a large bear with rabies. Can bears even get rabies? These thoughts were interrupted by Dan, who remembered the meat. Dan took the meat out and cut it into steaks to be cooked on the barbecue. When the meat was done, a few people grabbed the steaks. Everyone who tried them was impressed. The succulent exotic meat was unlike anything they had tasted before. Dan let them know that the steak had come from the creature he killed. At that point, what was left was cut up into smaller portions so everyone could taste Dan's monster. Its unique flavor had the whole town talking, adding a new spin to the annual barbecue. The disbelief turned to begrudging praise as they had to admit they had never tasted anything like these steaks before. As the sun began to set, the happy scene was shattered by a low growl. Primal and chilling, it filled the air, sending a ripple of unease through the crowd. Dan felt his blood run cold as he turned towards the source of the sound. Emerging from the tree line, wounded but still imposing, was the beast, the monstrous creature from the forest that Dan had sworn he'd killed. It moved with purpose, its eyes focused intently on the adults in the pavilion, running past all the children who were just playing in the field. Before anyone could comprehend the situation, it broke through the shocked crowd, sending people scattering in fear. The laughter and merriment of moments ago was replaced by screams of terror as the barbecue descended into chaos. The people of Mount Birch were no strangers to wildlife, but this was something else entirely. As the dust settled, and they got a clear view of the beast, it was the creature from Dan's blurry photo. Not a bear, but a true monstrosity from the depths of the forest. The realization that they'd eaten a part of this creature sent a wave of horror through the crowd. The taste of the exotic meat, once a source of delight, now filled their mouths with a nauseating bitterness. Dan, standing among the scattered picnic tables and grills, could only watch in stunned silence. The creature had come to reclaim what was taken from it. As the chaos unfolded, something strange began to occur. Despite its size and aggression, the beast seemed uninterested in the children who had been playing in the field. It was as if the creature could distinguish between those who were a threat and those who were not. It became quickly apparent that the beast was targeting the adults, moving purposefully through the crowd with its keen eyes focused on them. It was as if he knew something the people didn't. As the terrifying truth dawned, a cold wave of horror washed over Dan. The beast wasn't attacking at random. It was targeting people who had partaken of its flesh, those who had savored the exotic taste of the meat he brought to the barbecue. It wasn't there for revenge. It was there to reclaim what had been taken from it. Its actions were not guided by blind rage, but by an instinctive need for restitution. The children who hadn't tasted the monster's meat were safe. The adults who laughed off Dan's story and consumed the beast's stolen flesh were the ones in danger. And Dan, who had taken the meat, was at the center of it all. As he watched the beast move through the terrified crowd, ripping his neighbors, friends, and family to pieces, he felt a heavy guilt for his actions in the forest. It was him that brought this horror upon his town. As the beast continued to wreak havoc, Dan understood that he had to take control. He had confronted this monstrosity before and lived to tell the tale. With courage welling up inside of him, he shouted above the pandemonium, trying to rally the panicked townfolk. "We can fight this thing off. I've done it once, and we can do it again if we stick together." He scanned their faces, hoping to see a spark of determination, or even a flicker of the communal strength that this tight-knit community was known for. And for a brief moment, there was a glimmer of hope. Some heads nodded, eyes showing a hint of resolve. But before Dan's rallying cry could truly take hold, the beast lunged at him. The townsfolk could only watch in horror as the creature, seemingly enraged by Dan's defiance, came down on him. The hopeful expressions immediately evaporated and were replaced by sheer terror as what was left of Dan's body was lifted off the ground by the monstrous intruder and whipped side to side. Everyone scattered. Their brief moment of optimism turned into a renewed wave of fear. The horrifying reality of the situation was undeniable now. The beast was not only real, but also lethal. Their skepticism of Dan's initial story had left them woefully unprepared, and it was a mistake that cost them dearly. Their laughter, now screams. Their disbelief, now undeniable horror. Once the beast had claimed what it came for, it disappeared back into the depths of the woods, leaving behind a scene of horror and devastation that would haunt the town of Mount Birch for years to come. The next day's papers read, "Mount Birch Memorial Day Mayhem at Annual Barbecue." And the article read, "The quaint, peaceful town of Mount Birch, Maine is struggling to come to terms with an unfathomable incident that has shocked the close-knit community. Yesterday, during their cherished annual Memorial Day barbecue, the townsfolk were subjected to a harrowing ordeal that resulted in numerous casualties and injuries. While the exact circumstances surrounding the tragedy remain unclear, authorities have begun piecing together a grim picture from eyewitness accounts. The problem is, the only survivors were children. Descriptions of the scene speak of a brutal attack of unprecedented nature. One unnamed source described the scene as a battlefield, or like something out of a horror movie. Speculation is rife as investigators seek to identify the cause of the violent incident. Some witnesses have suggested a rabid animal attack, while law enforcement is focused on a possible altercation that spiraled out of control. Authorities are yet to rule out any possibilities, but they have reiterated their commitment to discovering the truth behind this horrifying incident. In the face of this unimaginable tragedy, the residents of Mount Birch are left to pick up the pieces, their once peaceful community forever marked by the Memorial Day Massacre. And that, my dear listeners, brings us to the end of our journey through the dark and horrifying events of that fateful Memorial Day in Mount Birch. Remember this Memorial Day that you are a vital part of this community as a member of the Super Horror family. Your love for sharing creepy stories is what keeps our fires burning here on Whispers in the Dark. As we part ways for tonight, I leave you with this thought. Let this story be a reminder to respect nature and its mysteries, to be responsible in our actions, and above all, to always value the bonds and trust with the communities you belong to. As usual, I hope you all sleep well tonight. But remember, on this show, sweet dreams are not guaranteed. Good night.